Hello, today I am bringing you a 5 tabling PLO 4 video for global poker, and I've already got the tables up, so we're just going to get right into the action. I am doing a little table starting as well, so we're going to see some heads up play, some three-handed play, which I think should be pretty interesting. And already we got a couple situations here. Table 1, we've got a nut wrap, and table 2, and spades in table 2. We flop the nuts with redraws, so both very strong situations. Fortunately, we do brick the 20 out draw on table 1. So I did just start playing. I don't have too many reads on anybody just yet, so we'll have to see what develops. Table 4 would have been an interesting situation too if my opponent had checked. SVR is pretty small, 2 SVR. Yes, I'll go for it. I think it's kind of close, maybe. Play back, get there. I might drop it down to 4 tables, so a little more time to think about my decisions. You don't get a lot of time with global poker compared to some other sites. Yeah. I do have a note on this player that I'm playing heads up against, which is that he repeatedly open limped I'm still trying to figure out exactly how the blinds work in heads up PLO on global poker, because normally it's like it is right here, where the small blind is the button. But here, see, it looks like I'm the button in the big blind. Yeah, which is atypical. The thinking being that it's generally just too strong an advantage to be able to act last on all straights. So I don't know if what the deal is with that. I guess it might have something to do with where the button is when the three-handed or four-handed game or whatever ends. Table 4, I raise a limp with pretty strong aces, and not really a great flop, very dynamic board. And I do have backdoor diamonds, but I think the best approach is to just check and fold to a substantial wager. Table 1, 3 of a kind. I would fold if my opponent raised here. It's pretty credible. A turn raise is pretty credible. And I'm pretty happy to see a free showdown on this river. It's not that unlikely for my opponent to have picked up a flush draw on the turn, given that he's continuing to call. Does have to have something to continue to call. Table 3, kind of a marginal situation, marginal hand, top pair, top kicker. Draw board, or dry board, but basically just checking with the hope of taking the pot down. Similar situation here on table 4, and I'm going to check back the turn, and definitely value bet the river. You have to think if my opponent had 3 of a kind or a straight, he would bet the river himself. So pretty safe spot to value bet. Pretty obvious spot to value bet. Table 1. I don't really believe in making pure bluffs on the flop or the turn. So I just check back the flop, and pretty nice run out. I do end up with a second nut flush, and I think it is a very clear spot to value bet. There's a potential straight that can pay me off. Loose player might even call me with like bluff catching with a pair, like under pair, that sort of thing. Table 3, I open really good kings, and this is it's a very bad flop for my hand. So an extremely dynamic board that is going to connect with a lot of different hands. So if my opponent checks, I will bet the turn. I mean, I would rather like a deuce pairing the board, but in general, with an overpair, a board pair is pretty good, even top pair. But I'm just going to assume my opponent has 3 of a kind too often to continue to call. Especially this opponent who has been open limping frequently, which it's not, necessarily positive proof that they never bluff. But it is sort of a soft indication that they might be a little more straightforward, a little more honest of a player. So, also against very loose players, which I don't really have confirmation that this player is a very loose player, and it's tough to get that sort of confirmation heads up because sort of basic strategy, if you will, it is to play very loose, but against an opponent who plays even looser than is optimal, I adjust I don't open as frequently. I still open frequently, but I open less frequently than I would against a player who folded the big blind more. And even though I have the second nuts here on table 3 and the 8 blocker, I don't think that my hand's going to be good even 33% of the time, given that it was just checked down to the river and my opponent's now making a pot-sized raise, and that it's very likely that he has exactly 8-9. And part of adapting to loose passive players is you don't pay them off, even when you have a strong hand. That game theory would say you have to call because it's the second nuts or whatever. But when you have opponents who have such a myopic strategy, who play in such an exploitable manner, the last thing you want to do is not adjust to that strategy. And there's a lot of opportunities in PLO to make very extreme plays on the basis of your reads and observations of your opponent. So you should do that. You should don't feel like you have to call just because you have a strong hand if your opponent is never going to show up with a worse hand. And obviously you do need to continually challenge and retest your theories, your reads, your observations of your opponents. And that's something that doesn't really occur, not in poker, but more broadly in thought, in science. And is scientists don't really test their basic assumptions. They sort of have a paradigm, and it's the Kuhnian theory of the history of scientific development. Table 4, I open a very weak hand, get 3-bet. I'm going to go ahead and call. And it's kind of an unfortunate flop, but I'm going to go with it heads up. I think there's a pretty good chance I'm in bad shape. But actually, I was a slight favorite. And that certainly would have been something that I made a note of, that my opponent 3-bet ace, queen, 8-6, heads up. It's non-standard play. It's not really a great hand to be re-raising with. But in general, flopping bottom 2 in a 3-bet bot when there's an ace on the board is it's a very bad situation, because yeah, your hand's better than average, but there's also a very good chance that your opponent has 3 aces. So even if we were just deeper there, I would fold on the flop for sure. The main reason I stacked off, I mean, it's heads up, so obviously you can't really put a guy on aces just because he 3-bet, but also SPR was very low. So the lower the SPR, the lower your standard should be for stacking off, because now the pot becomes so important. There's so much money in the pot that it's more important to take it down. And then once you've bet, now in situations that are low SPR in the first place, now you're going to be offered such compelling odds that you have no choice but to stack off. So kind of a dicey hand here on the bottom. King 4, 3 deuce. In general, wheel cards are not very good in PLO. You're going to hit the bottom end of stuff. But on the button, this hand should be raised. Table 4, open. Pretty decent hand for heads up play. And put 3 bets. I'm not really interested in folding at this point. I could maybe call and then get away on certain turn cards. But I don't know necessarily what I don't want to see. So, thinking I would check raise the flop. It's a pretty nice river. It's definitely going to bet decently big. Unfortunately, it looks like we're chopping. Nope, I win. Must have had queen 8. Table 3, turning the nuts here. And we do have a small redraw, so that's pretty sweet. Table 4, I'm just going to check fold this flop. Middle pair, backdoor diamonds. Okay, let's do it. Hopefully I have the best redraw here. Oh no. Oh, okay, yes. Right. I thought he scooped for a second. I don't even know what's going on. This guy's really aggro right now, so that's why I fold his hand. And Parent Gutty definitely going to check raise the turn. No. Snap checking back here. Okay, pretty good flop on table 2. I flopped top set and a queen high flush draw. So should increase the size of the pot here. Might be advantageous to do so. Oh, we got some chat. some non-PC chat. Wow. This guy is not very nice. Almost accidentally called there. I told him to behave. Okay, so he opened the button. I 3-bet. This guy took 2 to the face, and he 4-bets all in for not that much more. I'm definitely going to 5-bet. If he flat called aces, then good for him. And 3 queens. Unfortunate run out there. River. Flopping bottom set. 2 players call. The turn completes a straight. Ace 3 or 3-6. Very dynamic board. And the river completes 6-7 as well. So normally I don't like to semi-bluff as much in position, but this is just such a premium draw with the nut flush draw and the inside wrap. And oh, 3 sevens. I didn't even see that. Sweet. All right, building some stacks here on Global Poker. $4 PLO. It's at least this guy stopped with the abusive language. That's nice. You get all sorts at these tables. And yeah, we get some good tables, some good action. So hopefully we get some interesting situations, and people who are a little newer to PLO can get an idea of how the game plays and what sort of decisions are typical. So table 3, I open ace 10, 6, 7 double suited, get called through that, and the Leafs player cold calls. I'm going to call, but I'm not really in love with this situation. I flop a pair and a gut shot. And I'm going to go with it. I think I'm going to have 40% almost always. Aces, yeah. But unfortunately I lose. It's possible, like, I probably had just about 40% there. So when you're getting 1.5 to 1 to stack off, because there was about half as much in the pot as was in his stack. Like, for example, if he has a stack of $2 and there's $1 in the pot, then you're getting 1.5 to 1 to stack off, and you need equity of about 40%. So rainbow board, Parent Gutty, figured I would have that. He did have my ace crushed, so I still think I had about 40%. Table 4, really dry board. Maybe I could have bet the flop as well, top. Whatever, deal. And I river the nuts. That was good. He's back. Okay, definitely looks like we are going to chop this one. Table 3, just going to fold. Not really great hand structure. PLO, you want 4 cards that are working together. Table 4, I'm the small blind, so I'm offered really good odds, 7-1. So this hand is definitely worth a call, despite the dangler. And even for just a 4-cent bet, I'm not going to call on the flop. Certainly for the 24-cent raise, I wouldn't. In general, in PLO, you have to be very careful anytime you're drawing to a hand that is not the nuts. So because there's a pair on the board, a full house is possible. And actually, it's the same thing in Hold'em too. But definitely in PLO, you want to be really careful about calling any draw to a hand that's not the nuts. It's just not generally very advised, because often they will have a hand that has you drawing dead. So if you're drawing to a non-nut flush draw, often they will have the nut flush draw, or somebody will have the nut flush draw. And table 1, I open the button with, again, a pretty weak double-suited hand. You do want to raise pretty frequently on the button. And I turn a flush draw. So now I have a pair, a gut shot, and a flush draw. And I was just saying you shouldn't draw to non-nut flushes. I am going to draw to this non-nut flush. So one thing is the pot's heads up. So your standards for hands that you should call on go down. And I'm going to go for value here on the river. Potentially I could fold if he goes all in. Even though there's only 2 hands that beat me, the ace high or king high flush. And I would be getting odds. Table 2, I flop a 5-card wrap. But the board has a flush draw. So one thing you want to do in these situations is count your nut out. So I've got 3 4s, 2 5s, and 2 10s. 8s and 9s don't actually give me the nuts. The 4 of spades obviously doesn't give me the nuts because it completes a potential straight. And when you have a straight but there's a flush on the board, it's not really a situation where you want to value bet. Now, I'm getting 4-1, so I only have to be good about 20% of the time. Still going to fold. It would be a pretty bad play to bluff into 3 players, which isn't to say that somebody wouldn't do it, because people do make mistakes on the poker table. That's sort of the whole point. Table 4, I have the nut flush draw and a gut shot, and I think it's okay to call on the flop. This player is very aggressive, so probably more likely to have air than some other players. Okay, table 4. I flop an overpair, a very dynamic board, and in bet, try to take down the pot. There's a ton of cards I don't really want to see on the turn, and most of the time my hand should be good. There's only, I guess there's some possibilities that can be me aces or kings, or I could have flopped through the kind or the full house. Table 3. Decent hand for a multi-way pot. I've got a couple ways to flop pretty strong hands, like combo draws with clubs or three of a kind tens. It's a hand with a decent amount of nut potential, and definitely I prefer being in like a 4 or 5-way pot with this hand, because most of the time you're going to flop just like a pair of tens or a gutty that you can't really proceed with. So it's more of an implied odds hand that wants a lot of people in. And I think I'm just going to check here on table 2. Pretty good hand. The 8 does dangle a little bit. I don't recommend raising too frequently in the big blind against limpers. If this was like the 10 of diamonds, I would pretty much have to. My hand would just be too strong to check. But I like table 1. I like to size smaller on extremely dry boards like this. I mean, any board that has a pair is dry, even if there's a lot of draws, because like flushes don't beat full houses. So it's a lockdown board. And in general with lockdown boards, lockdown meaning it's difficult for the nuts to change on the next card. So in general on lockdown boards, you can bet less. Table 3, I called pre-flop, and I'm going to stack off on this flop, top 2. Pretty draw-heavy board. And it's pretty tough to give my opponent credit for a big set when I have ace-king. So he could be semi-bluffing with a lot of hands, or he could be chopping. And I do manage to win the pot, so it's pretty nice. Table 1, kind of a marginal hand here. Got some gaps and only a king-high suit. I think I'm going to fold to the raise. I won't open it myself, obviously. I don't really have too much of a read on this player, so I'm going to take the conservative approach for now, and this isn't really a great hand to be calling raises with anyway. I would prefer more connectivity and a nut suit, ideally. Table 2, aces. Aces are always a pretty good hand in PLO, almost always. And often the best thing to do is to raise when you have them, especially if there's prospect of getting re-raised. So certainly going to make an isolation raise here of Offwig, who I have a note from a previous session that he limped in a full ring game. He limped a very weak hand in early position. So not something that I consider very telling. It says a lot about how the player views the game and whether they're positionally aware. And I check back the flop. Could bet too, maybe. On the turn, I've got a nut flush draw, a gut shot, and aces. I think I'm going to fold. This player potted it 3-way with a very loose player left to act. So I think there's a pretty good chance he has 3 of a kind. And I think that there's a very common leak for micro PLO players, is that they bluff catch too frequently. They're worried about getting bluffed out of a lot of pots, and I think that that's a problem that can potentially turn a winning player into a losing player. So, well, there is a rule for bluff catching in very low stakes Omaha, and you should definitely think about the possibility that your opponent is bluffing. you really want to be biased more towards folding. Um, Especially, these games generally play very loose, so most people recognize in most situations it is futile to bluff. So there's sort of a meta game where because people call all the time, people don't bluff. So obviously, you do have to observe and adapt to your opponents. Some players bluff at a very high frequency, so that is something you want to observe for and take notes on, and then plan your play accordingly. Another common mistake is to take too many check call lines with strong hands against loose passive players when bet folding is the more rational approach. Um, I think a lot of people see check calling with strong hands on the river, for example, when only an unlikely backdoor draw gets in there as sort of a safer approach. But the reality is there's risks with every course of action, right? You risk not getting value if they would call you with a weak hand. And and at the end of the day, you know, the dollars that you miss from not getting enough value are just as costly as you know, the dollars you can save by making good folds. So you do want to be careful about taking check call lines against loose fast players who are unlikely to bluff. In general, with like a medium strength hand, you're better off betting and folding to a raise unless you've observed a high bluff frequency, in which case you will want to, especially on lockdown boards, take some more check call lines, even on the flop and the turn with strong hands or the nuts, as an adaptation to their play. But in general, when you don't have that read on them, you should just assume that they're not going to be bluffing frequently, especially in multi-way pots. Bluff success rates in multi-way pots are very low, so most people do not bluff frequently in multi-way pots because they recognize that. And in general, I do not recommend trying to bluff multiple players out of the pot, and I don't recommend trying to bluff on the flop or the turn at all. It's better to it's better to semi-bluff, to bet draws, and then again only in limited situations, like if you're heads up out of position against a regular, then you might want to semi-bluff because you don't have the option of checking back. When you're heads up in position, you want to semi-bluff less frequently because you do have the option to just see what happens. And you don't want to semi-bluff as frequently against loose players because they tend not to fold. Table 2 on the button here, 10-10 King 7. Pretty marginal hand, but when you're on the button and a very loose player open limps the cutoff, you can play a little bit looser. It's a pretty good situation. You're going to be in position. You don't need to have an incredibly strong hand. I mean, you don't want to take this too far. So 5-1, definitely enough to call here with this okay draw. One thing is I'm not closing the action, so either of these players could have raised, in which case my 4-cent call would be forfeit. You can also call behind, as they did, in which case I end up getting better odds and also potentially paid off. So now I'm getting about 2-1. Yeah, I'm getting 2-1 on the call. He made a pot-sized raise, and I've only got 6 nut outs, so I'm just going to fold. Hearts could definitely be good, but I don't want to make a big call with only 6 nut outs. Big relative to the blinds, I guess. It's not really not a huge amount of money in absolute terms, but I would rather have sufficient pot odds to justify the call on the basis of my nut outs alone. And I might call if I was only close on nut outs, but there in that situation it wasn't even close. We know 8 cards, my 4 and the 4 on the board, so there's 44 remaining. So the ratio of nut outs is 6 to non-nut outs is 38. So that's 6.5 to 1 against making the nuts on the river, and I was getting 2 to 1 in pot odds, so not even remotely close. I could make a flush too, but it's not a nut. So obviously there's some value in the non-nut draw, but it's not something I want to rely on in making my analysis because it's non-nut. So you have to at the very least discount the flush draw there by half, which would still not bring us really all that close to the 14 or 15 outs we're looking for to have the direct pot odds. Table 3, aces here. Open it up, first in, pot-sized raise. And looks like we'll go 3 or 4 to the flop, single raised. And I flop top set, so with a 4, unfortunate 4 here. Gonna go for just a half pot bet. Try to get maybe multi-way to the turn. And any spade is going to give me pause, although my opponent only has 57 cents left, so probably just going to stack off even if the flush comes. Well, I guess I'll end this video for now, but thanks for watching. And I am going to be producing a lot of these, so please, if you're interested in seeing some more of this content, subscribe and maybe share this video on Facebook. And yeah, until next time, good luck at the tables, and I hope you enjoyed watching my video. Peace.